Hello friends, welcome back. Today we would be learning something very exciting and very interesting, that is how to automatically sync Excel sheets with the Google Sheets. So first let me give you a demo. This is my Excel sheet. This is the data: first name, last name, age and occupation. These three columns I would explain you in a while, but these three should be there in your Excel sheet for the syncing to happen. The purpose of these three columns I'll explain in detail in few minutes. So let's see our Google Sheet. So this is the Google Sheet. It also has these columns: first name, last name, age, occupation and unique ID. So now when I click on this button, just wait for a few seconds, and now if I check my Google Sheet, you could see the data is getting populated over here, and within few seconds both the Excel sheet and the Google Sheet will have the same data. Here the execution has completed. You could mark the status, like you check the status has been marked as synced, which means both the data are same. You could see, you could do a quick verification. This is the Google Sheet which was auto populated from the source Excel sheet. So these columns are exactly the same. So a question would be coming to your mind: what if I do some edit? For example, if I change the age at row number 3 from 50 to 52, I change the age for row number 5 from 25 to 18, and also the occupation from service to student. So you could see automatically the sync status has been vanished from here. I'll show you how I did that. But again, if I want to sync it, I just click on this button over here. If I see my Google Sheet, the same changes have been reflected over here. You could see the last row, age is 18, occupation is student. At row number 3, age is 52. So all the changes which were made on the Excel sheet have been synchronized in the Google Sheet as well. And again, the status has been marked as synced. Hope you found the demo interesting. Now I will actually show you all the steps and the code which will actually perform the task of synchronization between the Excel sheet and the Google Sheet. So let's begin. So to achieve this synchronization between the Excel sheet and the Google Sheet, we have to follow these 10 steps. I'll show you each step one by one. It does not involve any complex installation. The steps are pretty straightforward, and if you follow these steps, I can guarantee you that you would be able to achieve synchronization of your Excel sheet with the Google Sheet. So these are the first 3 steps. Step 1, on the Excel sheet which needs to be synced, we have to add these 3 columns. So this is my Excel sheet. So I have these 4 columns which has the actual data, and these 3 columns, I told you these are very important. I'll explain you the importance of these columns, but whatever are the total number of columns in your Excel sheet, make sure the last 3 columns are these 3 columns: unique ID, to be deleted and the status. These 3 columns should be added to the Excel sheet which you need to sync. So this was step 1. Step 2 is very simple. We have to create a similar Google Sheet, like it will have the same column headers as the Excel sheet, but here in the Google Sheet the last 2 columns, status and to be deleted column, can be ignored. So if you see my Google Sheet, it has the same column headers: first name, last name, age and occupation, and unique ID. This is the additional column, but the to be deleted column and the status column are ignored. So these were the first 2 steps, pretty simple. Now the third step. The third step is the most important step in this entire tutorial. The step says create a Google form having fields corresponding to the column headers. Now I'll show you how to create the Google form. We'll be using this Google form to actually perform the synchronization. To create a Google form, what you have to do is go to this URL, docs.google.com. Here select this main menu, forms, and select a blank form. Now you have to add the fields with respect to the column headers. So here, which column headers do we have? The first name, last name, age, occupation. In fact, we should refer to the Excel sheet because we are syncing from the Excel, so we should be referring to the Excel sheet. So I would have first name, last name, age, occupation, unique ID and to be deleted. Like all these columns would be added as a field in the Google form. So to add those fields, it is very simple. By default this form will come with one field. I have to select short answer because this would be the for first name, click on this button. Again, this would be short answer for last name. So like first name and last name, I have added age, occupation, unique ID, and finally to be deleted. This I am keeping it as a multiple choice because the options would be either yes or no. So the first option I'm marking it as yes, and the second option I'm marking it as no, and my Google form is ready. One important thing on the top, you can see this form is collecting emails. We do not need that. Just click on change settings and uncheck this checkbox and save it. Now your form is ready. So now we have completed the first 3 steps which were mentioned over here, and now we will come to the 4th step, which is link the Google form to the Google Sheet created in step 2. So I'm here at this Google form, and this is my Google Sheet. Like I had given this name sync with Excel. This was my Google Sheet, and I have to link this Google form with the Google Sheet. How to do that? You have to go to the responses tab of this Google form. Here you could see this control, the 3 dots, click on it, select response destination. Since I have the spreadsheet ready, I'll select existing spreadsheet, click on select, and here select the Google Sheet. In our case, it is sync with Excel. I just double clicked on it, and the form is now linked with the sheet. You could see a new tab has come up over here. It has the same columns: first name, last name, age, occupation, unique ID to be deleted, and an additional one which is called the timestamp. Now, what is the meaning of this step? Linking of Google form to the Google Sheet. It means that whenever a response would be sent to this form, a corresponding entry would be made in this Google Sheet. So this was step 4, in which we linked the Google form with the Google Sheet. Our intention would be, this is our Excel with the data. From this Excel, somehow we have to populate the Google form, and as soon as the Google form would be populated, a corresponding entry would be made in this sheet. So now, how to populate the Google form from the Excel? For that, we would be needing some details about the Google form. So we'll perform the next step. The next step is step number 5. Generate pre-filled URL of the Google form. So how to do that? This is my Google form. On the Google form, on the questions tab, on the top right hand corner, select this control with 3 dots. You'll get this option, get pre-filled link. Click on it. This kind of a form will open. Just populate with any random values. Unique ID also. So all the fields with any random values, and select this option, get link. So below you could see this option to copy the link. Click on it. So now your link has been copied on the clipboard. This link is the pre-filled URL. So I'll show you which is the pre-filled URL. If I just do a control V, you could see this long URL is the pre-filled URL. So this was the step number 5, in which we generated the pre-filled URL. Before moving on to the next step, which is actually using this pre-filled URL into the VBA macro, let me explain you about this URL. So this is the URL. Up to here, we will need this URL, and whatever you see as and entry 747 and entry, these are actually nothing but the corresponding fields. So this is the Google form, and if you see, the first name was mentioned as JKV blah blah blah. So you could see the same thing is available over here, which means this field for first name corresponds to entry.747 and whatever it is. Similarly, each of the input field over here has a corresponding entry ID. You could see this one And finally you could see the last one, entry.4791820 is equal to no. That is for the to be deleted control. So we have the URL ready, and we understand like each of these entries are corresponding to the fields which are there on the Google form. Now we move on to the next step. Write the VBA code to submit the Google form and observe the response sheet. Now this is one of the most important steps. Here we would be submitting the Google form through the Excel VBA macro. So let's do that. For that I go back to my Excel VBA macro, go to the Visual Basic and insert one module like this and give any name. So before writing the actual code to submit the form through the Excel macro, there is one prerequisite, which is go to tools over here, then references, and make sure Microsoft XML v3.0 is selected. There would be other versions as well, but for this objective, make sure Microsoft XML v3.0 is selected. Once this is done, click on OK. Now we start writing the actual code. So first of all, we create this object, set HTTP. This is any variable of your choice, is equal to create object msxml2.server xml http. Now if within tools references this is not selected XML v3.0, then this statement will not work and it will throw you errors. So make sure that is selected, and only after which this statement will start working. Now the next line of code is very important, which is like we want to actually submit the form through the URL. So we would be using the pre-filled URL as I'll show. So we go back to the pre-filled URL. So this is our pre-filled URL. So we have to copy at up till here view form / view form. So I just copy this URL up to / view form, go back to the VBA editor, you create one variable str URL is equal to within double inverted quotes, paste whatever we had copied. Now at this point where we have view form, remove view form and write form response question mark. Do not make any spelling mistakes. It should be exactly as is. Form response, F small, R capital. So this is our URL. Now this URL is without data. We need to submit the URL along with the data. So the data part, which is this, the data part starts from here and entry 747. So we have to also send this data along with the URL for a successful form submission. So I am again copying this, going back to the VBA editor, creating another variable str data is equal to within double inverted quotes the entire thing. Now it is a very huge string, so to make it more readable, what I'll do, I'll just break it like this. So entry dot this up till here was the first value, so I'll just use the str data variable and keep on appending it like this. So you could see the str data is now having all the fields with its values. Now we want to submit the URL along with the data. For that, I'll create another variable, final URL is equal to str URL, which is this URL along with the data. So I use the ampersand str data. So our final URL is ready, and now we want to submit it. To submit it, the code goes like this. We'll use the HTTP object which we created earlier, http dot open within double inverted quotes post comma str URL. Now this should be the final URL, not str URL, comma false. The next line should be http dot send. So this would be actually these two lines of code would be actually submitting the Google form, and we need to verify whether the submission was successful or not. For that, we would use http.status text. We'll just use a message box to check whether the submission was successful or not. Now we will execute this. I hit this run button, and now you could see the status text is OK, which means the form has been submitted successfully. Let's verify. So if we go back to the Google form, this was the Google form. See, you could see the response is 1. So this is the response, and if we see the Google sheet which was attached to it, this was the Google sheet. This has the data. So whatever data we submitted from the Excel sheet has been embedded into this Google sheet which was linked to the form. So we are using the Excel VBA macro through which we are submitting the Google form, and Google form is internally linked to this sheet and it is populating the data. So up till now we have achieved transferring data from Excel to this sheet, but our final intention would be to have same data in the Excel sheet and the data tab. This sheet would act as a reference, like we would be using this sheet and then populating the data sheet. I'll tell you why we have to follow this approach. And now the submission which we had done through the Excel macro, this was entirely hard coded. We do not want that. We want it to pick up the data from this sheet and then do the form submissions. So this hard coding I'll remove and replace it with a proper code. So after replacing the hard coded things with proper variables, the code looks like this. I'll explain you. Like I have used this int total rows. This will give me the total number of rows in my Excel sheet, so that I will use a for loop and iterate through each of the rows and do the form submission. In our case, the Excel has 5 rows in which the first row is the header. So we have 4 rows of data. So we would expect 4 rows of data to be submitted once we execute this. This code is very simple, and do not worry, I will paste the entire code on the blog and I'll share the blog link also. So you could just refer the code when you're trying to do it by yourself. Now, very important, the line which I'm highlighting, str unique ID. So what I have done is I have placed one arbitrary number in cell BA1. The number as 2001. You could start with any number. The importance of this number is what will happen is, like when the submissions would be done, this unique ID will get populated. This unique ID will get populated for each new row of data which will get submitted. A new ID will be getting populated. So what will happen is, like, this unique ID will help us when we are actually editing. So make sure that you somewhere, like I have just placed it in the cell BA1, you could place it anywhere, but you should keep it so that each new row of data which you are entering, which you are submitting on the Google form, has a unique ID, because the same unique ID would be used when we are doing either an edit operation or a delete operation. I'll show you both the cases, and then you will further understand the importance of unique ID. In the VBA code, here we are reading the unique ID at this point, and after every successful submission, I will increment the unique ID by 1, and once again I will update the unique ID which was there at BA1, because this would be a location from where the unique ID will get picked up. So I'll increment it and update the value of BA1. As we updated the unique ID in the cell BA1, we should also do the same for this column E, because this is the place where the unique ID for each and every row is getting stored. So right now I am updating for the current row number like this. Okay, so this line of code will update the unique ID for the row which is getting submitted. So like if the first row is getting submitted, the unique ID will get updated at row number 2, same for 3, 4, 5 and onwards. And here at this line which I'm highlighting, we have mentioned the status as synced. Actually, it is not synced right now. We have just submitted the form. So I'll just update temporarily to submit it, because right now we are just submitting the data from the Excel sheet to the Google form, and Google form internally is submitting the data from the Google form to the linked Google sheet. The syncing part is still remaining, which we'll cover in few minutes, but for now I'm just updating the status as submitted. Okay, so this script is ready now. I'll just put a message box at the bottom, and let's execute and see what happens. So I click on this green button, go back to the Google form, and you could see at this Google sheet it has entered the data. And if we move back to the Excel sheet, the source data sheet, the data is exactly the same. These names along with a unique ID. And if we move back here on the Google sheet from row number 11 onwards, here you could see everything is same, which means at this point we are successfully able to read the data from the Excel sheet and transfer it to this Google sheet. So we have just inserted in this form response sheet. Right now syncing is not happening, synchronization part is still pending. But before moving on to the synchronization part, let me explain you the next step, which is step 7, update the VBA script for handling edits. So right now in this Excel sheet, like all these were new rows of data which were getting submitted. But what will happen if there is an edit? This is very important part, and this is the place where we'll understand why the unique IDs are so very important. So what will happen is, like, if I want to edit something, like for example, I just change the age of row number 5 from 18 to 25 and its occupation to service, automatically the status gets vanished. I have written a very small code for that. I'll show you in a few minutes, like what is the code that will get the status erased whenever we are doing any kind. So any kind of updates you do, for example here, the status will be vanished. This is very important. Why? Because when we are actually navigating through the rows of data, we will only submit the data for whom the status is blank. Because if the status is not blank, which means the data is already either synchronized or submitted. So now we'll update the VBA code such that it will only submit the rows of data which have the status as blank. So we go back to the VBA editor, and this is at this point we are submitting the data. So if you'd see, we are already capturing the status in this variable. So here I will have a condition if str status is equal to blank. So if it is blank, then only go ahead and do the submission. Okay. Now comes very interesting part regarding the unique IDs. Now, when I want to perform an edit, so I want to perform an edit on an existing unique ID. So in such scenario, I won't be incrementing the unique ID and not even updating the unique ID. So how I will handle it through the code? Very simple. If you would see the highlighted line, for each row we are picking up the unique ID. And at this point, at this line, where I'm writing the code, we are updating the unique ID. So we will only update the unique ID if it is blank. So here again, similar to status, I insert a condition if str unique ID is equal to blank, then only increment the unique ID and update the unique ID, else do not do anything. So at this point, we have handled the unique ID over here. But if you just scroll up and look at the highlighted line, here also we are using the str unique ID, and this str unique ID is getting picked up from the range BA1. So now here also we'll have to make a minor change similar to what we have done below. What we'll do is this thing. If again str unique ID is blank, the row unique ID is blank, then we would be using the unique ID which is coming from BA1. Else what we'll do is use the str row unique ID, which means it would be either for an edit or a delete. In case if it is a new entry, then definitely the str row unique ID would be blank and it will use the value which is coming from the range BA1. I understand the code is getting complex, but do not worry. I will update the code on the blog and I'll share it with you so that when you all are trying to achieve the same thing, you could just refer it, copy and paste it from there, and you could directly use it. Okay, so now all the changes which were needed are done, and now let's see what happens when we execute it. Okay, so now I click on this green button and it won't take much time. You could see within fraction of a second it completed. Here the status has been submitted, and now let's see what happened in the Google Sheet. So if you see the highlighted lines which I am showing, it picked up the data from the Excel sheet and inserted new rows. Now this is very important. Whenever we link the Google form to the Google Sheet, any response would be added as a new row. So although we edited, we did not add any new entry. Like here we have only 4 rows of data, but here in the Google Sheet it is treating it as a new entry and just appending it in the new rows. So this is the reason where we will need the extra data sheet, because this form response will act as a reference. Like all the entries will get dumped into here, but the final synchronization would be happening in the data sheet. The data sheet right now is blank because I have not written any script to update the data from the response sheet to the data sheet. That we'll be doing it in few minutes now. But now, do you understand the importance of unique ID? Because I have the unique ID. If I want to perform an edit or a delete, I will just refer to the latest instance of the unique ID and perform the edit on the final data sheet, so that in the final data sheet there won't be any new insertions. It would be an exact replica of the data which is present in the Excel sheet. So we have understood how to handle the edits. Now we are moving on to the next step, which is step 8, update the VBA script for handling deletes. Okay, here comes a very interesting step. Now from the data sheet, this Excel sheet, if I want to delete anything, what we'll do is we'll not be actually deleting it, like selecting a row and deleting, because if we do that, we'll lose the unique ID. We do not want to do that because everything is based on the unique ID. So instead of deleting the unique ID, we will just mark the row which we need to delete as yes. So I have marked this row and the last row as yes. Like these are marked to be deleted. So we'll have to update the VBA script such that it will delete the items from the Excel sheet, and how it will get reflected in the Google Sheet, that is even more interesting. So let's first update the VBA script to handle this deletes and then verify how it is updating in the Google Sheet. So we go back to the VBA editor. Now we have to be a bit careful. Again, we'll have to make some changes in the code. So if we just scroll up, here we have the variable which is storing whether it should be deleted or not. So at this point we are sending the data to the Google form. So here we will add another if condition. If is equal to yes, then here we will write the logic to have the rows deleted. We'll just close this if statement. Now for this logic we'll need some additional variables, so let me first show you those variables. So I'll need some public variables, so I am defining it over here. So this delete flag, I am initially setting it to false. Once we are at the position where we want to delete, I'll mark it as true, and I will use this flag somewhere else as well, because of which I have marked it as global, so that I could access this delete flag from this entire worksheet. The second one is one array I have used. This array will store the row numbers to be deleted, and the next is like the size of the array, because as in when we get more number of rows to get deleted, the size of the array will keep on changing. So this entire logic we will write it at this location here. So the code goes like this here. So we could see the delete flag, I have now set it to true. Read and preserve. Now I am changing the size of the array, as in when I get a row which is to be deleted, which is marked as deleted, yes, I will just keep on storing those row numbers in this array. This line is doing the job which I have highlighted, and I'll need another variable int array size. Like after each iteration, I want this to increment so that the size of the array will get redimensioned. So here I am incrementing it by 1. So like we had initialized the delete flag above as false, I'll also have this variable int array size initialized to 0, like this. Okay, so now you must be wondering why we are storing the rows to be deleted instead of directly getting it deleted. So the reason is, when we have a lot of rows, some rows we may have to edit, there would be additional rows as well. So if we delete in between before having the inserts and edits completed, it will mess up the entire synchronization activity. So to be safe, we will perform the deletion activity last. For that, what we'll do is we'll write a small function, as I'll show you. If I go here, I have written a very small function. It is a very small function. Here it is checking whether the deleted flag is true or not, because we saw, like, when we have the to be deleted flag as yes, we are setting the deleted flag, which is a global variable, to true. If it is true, then here it is actually performing the activity of deleting the rows. Another very important point, whenever you are using VBA to delete the rows in the Excel, it is always a very good practice to always delete from the bottom, not from the top. Why? If I show you over here, our main logic is iterating from row number 2 to the total number of rows which are present over here. If I will go from row number 2 and start deleting the rows which are marked as yes, then the total number of rows will change and it will impact the entire synchronization activity. So it is always a good practice to start deleting from bottom. So the code which I am highlighting right now will perform this activity. So what I'll do is I will call this function just before we are about to complete the activity. So as per the logic, all the inserts and edits will get completed, and then finally these two rows of data which are marked as yes will get deleted. So a code for deletion is also ready now. So let's now execute it and see what happens. So if everything is fine, these two rows of data will get deleted and there would be some corresponding entry in our response sheet over here. So let's see what happens. I come over here, hit the execution button, wait for a few seconds. Here is the done message, and if I see, you could see the rows which were marked for deletion have been removed from here. So this was one part we have successfully removed, but the most important part over here is what happened to the response sheet. So if you see, two new entries have been added over here, and most important part, column G, the value of column G for row number 19 and 20 are yes, which means these have to be deleted. So now, if you would have observed one thing from the beginning, whether it is an insert or an edit or a delete, always a new entry gets created. Whatever is coming from the Excel row by row, whether it is a new entry, whether it is an edited entry, or we are deleting it, every time there is a corresponding response in the response sheet, and the latest response gets populated in the last row. This is very important because using this last row, we will actually be synchronizing the data. Up till now, we are just dumping the data from the Excel sheet into this response sheet with the help of the Google form in between. But now is the time where we would be actually performing the synchronization activity. So to perform the synchronization activity, what we'll have to do is we have to pick up the data from the last row and then populate the data tab, because data is the exact replica of the Excel sheet. Now to do that, we'll have to write a small Google script. I'll show you. You'll have to go to Tools, Script Editor, it will load. You could use either the new version or the previous version of the script editor. I am using the old one. I'm comfortable with this. And here I have written the entire Google script, which is actually transferring the data from the response sheet. So this is my response sheet, form response 2. So you could see over here it is showing form responses 1. I'll change it to form responses 2. So it will start reading the data from responses 2 and populate the data sheet. So as soon as the last row over here gets populated, what we want to do is we want to trigger this particular script, which would be doing all the validations, like whether it is a new entry or it is an existing edit or a delete. So if you see code line number 30, I'm checking whether the data is already present. If the data is already present, then I'm next validating whether it is to be deleted or it is just an edit. So if it is a delete, then here we are performing the delete activity. If it is an edit, we are editing, and this else part is used when it is a new row to be added into the data sheet. Also below, there is a small function which I have written to check whether the data is already existing. So do not worry, this entire code, the VBA code as well as the Google script code is already there on the blog. You have to just refer it and you could use it for synchronizing your Excel sheets to Google Sheets. Now, this was a brief explanation about this code, but one thing I just mentioned, like this code should get executed as soon as we see a new row is added into this form response sheet. How we can achieve that? Like whenever there is an entry over here, at that point this should get executed. If it is not executed at that instance, then the synchronization will not at all work. So how we can manage that? So to achieve that, what we'll have to do is we'll have to create a trigger. To create the trigger, you could see this clock kind of an icon. Click on it and you would be able to see this kind of a screen. And now if you want to add a trigger, click this button, add trigger. A new window will come up. Here you have to select which function the trigger should be set. So you have to mention the name of this function. In our case, the function name is sync with Excel. So here we select sync with Excel. This will remain as is. Now what is the event source? So we want to trigger it from the spreadsheet. Like there are other options. We are not interested in those right now because we want to trigger it on the spreadsheet. And what is the event type? So if we click on this drop down, the last option says on form submit. So you have to select this. In layman's language, what will happen is whenever there is a form submission, this sync with Excel function will get triggered. And where is this sync with Excel function written? You have to just click on the save button over here. And here if I come, this is the place where the sync with Excel is written. So anytime there is a new entry in the form response sheet, this function will get automatically triggered because of the trigger which we have set up. So after each entry, this function will get executed and this will make the synchronization possible. Okay, at this point, we have written all the script. We have written the VBA script. We have written the Google script. And now we are in a position where we could do the final validation. So once again, I go back to my VBA editor. And here I'll just make small changes. So instead of submitted, now submitted was a temporary value. I change it to sync. And here at this point where I was updating the unique ID at column E, in my spreadsheet over here, I am very sorry, I had made a small mistake. I should remove it from here and instead I would be updating the unique ID here at the location where I am updating the URL. If str row unique ID is blank, then I am updating column E with the str unique ID, else I am updating with the row unique ID. Okay, So at this point, all the changes are done, and if everything is fine, we should be able to achieve synchronization between the Excel sheet and the Google Sheet. So let's go ahead and validate it. So this is my Excel sheet. It has some data. Remember the column BA1 here. We have to update it with any arbitrary value. I am putting it as 4000. You could put any value. This is as good as we are trying to synchronize the Excel sheet with the Google Sheet for the very first time. So this my Excel sheet is ready. If I see my Google Sheet, the data tab is empty, and let's see what happens when we actually do the synchronization. So this is my VBA code. I hit the run button, and now let's observe what is happening with the Google Sheet. You could see the data has started populating. The unique ID starts from 4000, which was expected. And now it has completed the execution. You could see this message over here. And now if we would do a quick verification, the data which was present in this Excel sheet is exactly synchronized with the Google Sheet. Okay, insertion worked well. Now let's validate updation and deletion. So here I am updating some values. For example, for at row number 4, I'm changing the spelling of last name. I include another L. You could see but automatically the status vanished. I'm changing the age at row number 5 from 19 to 22, from student to service, and I'm marking row number 3 for deletion. And now if we execute it, let's see what happens. So the execution has started in the background. We can check the Google Sheet. Something is happening. The execution has completed. Get this message box, and now the first verification, the row which was marked as deleted has been deleted. You could see there are now 4 rows, and let's see whether we have the same data in the Google Sheet. You could see here also there are 4 rows which are exactly same as we have in the Excel sheet. So both are synchronized, and as far as the updates are concerned, those are also updated. Like you could see the last name, I had included another L over here. The same thing has been reflected here. So in a nutshell, we have successfully achieved synchronization of the Excel sheet with the Google Sheet. Hope you found this interesting. So it is a 10-step procedure which I had shown you, and all these steps along with the code is available here on the blog. I'll show you. This is the blog within Google Sheets. AutoSync Excel with Google Sheets. So all the steps, if you just scroll down, it has the VBA code. Also, it has the Google script code. And one thing I did not explain, like how I achieved erasing the synced status when we perform any edit on the Excel sheet. So this was my Excel sheet, and anytime like if I change anything over here, the sync status gets vanished. For that, what I have done is, like within the Visual Basic Editor, we have to go to the sheet on which the operation is being performed. In our case, it was a data sheet, so I have to just double click on it, and I have used this worksheet change event. How to get this event is, like you have to select your worksheet, and in the second option here you have to select change. So by default you'll get a template, like you'll get private sub worksheet change and end sub, and you have to write this code. So this code is also present here on the blog. It is given over here, so you could use this as well. So everything is provided. Maybe like you'll have to just make certain changes based on the number of columns which you would be having in your Excel sheet, which needs to be synced with the Google Sheet. Rest everything should be exactly as it is provided on the blog and the steps which I have explained in the tutorial. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you like my videos, I would request you to please subscribe to my channel so that you would be updated with the latest videos I would be uploading. Guys, thanks for joining. I'll see you soon.